is a favorite topic of politics. I think the main proponent of this particular vector of energy is European Commission's President von der Leyen. And I would like to quote what she said at the Berlin Transition Dialogue in March 2021. She said, "Clean hydrogen is a perfect means towards our goal of climate neutrality. Clean hydrogen can power heavy industries, propel our cars or trucks and planes, store seasonal energy, and heat up our homes. And all of this with almost zero emissions." The European Commission has already published a hydrogen strategy in July 2020 that was broadly endorsed by European Parliament, by Council, but also by most stakeholders. Clean Hydrogen Alliance has been created, project pipelines are being presented, and now we come to the issues that seems, well, perhaps not so difficult. The need for a robust hydrogen regulation proposal. And we know that it should come this year. But the challenge is how to calibrate it. So it should not be too tight to slow down developments, but not too loose to create problems later on. And that means that it's far from easy. And additionally, you need also to look on this energy system integration. Energy system well coupling, so it's quite a challenging task actually. Today's debate, we wanted to start with Professor Jones and myself introducing our views, so it is our personal views, and then we would like to go to high-level roundtable with discussants who are experts and managers that have invested a lot of efforts and time in hydrogen. And they are Yorgos Chatzimarkakis, Secretary General from Hydrogen Europe, Ilaria Conti, Head of Gas Area from Florence School of Regulation, Jakob Hansen, Director General Fertilizers Europe, Jan Ingversen, General Director ENSOG, and Boyko Nitsov, Team Leader for Gas Infrastructure Development at ESA. Conclusions will be done by Benedikt Klauser from European Commission. And what I would very much welcome your questions. So don't hesitate to write questions on this issue, because I will try to use them as soon as possible. And now, without much more from me, I would like to ask Professor Jones to introduce the subject.
Thank you, Andres, and good morning, folks, and thanks to all our speakers. I shall just share my screen for the, share screen, share, and just ask it to be so kind. Do we have a slideshow?
Yes, we do, but could you put in presentation mode, please, Christopher? Slideshow, yeah, like a slideshow. We see, but now we see also.
Okay, just one sec. Apologies for this, folks. There we go. Okay.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to try and do is, as Andres said, is explain our views of, first part of our views, of what we think should be in the forthcoming legislation. And as we all know, well, what I understand it to be, is that that's going to be in two separate blocks. In the first block is in 14th of July, it seems, is what we'd call the market-related issues. So on the 14th of July, we have the issues which is connected to the RED II directive, which is, sorry, I'm trying to get this to move. Okay. So we have the market-related issues. In other words, the definitions that one needs to apply in relation to guarantees of origin and in relation to support schemes. And another point which isn't on there, additionality, which we'll come to. So I will talk about these. And then in October, we will have the second part, the network-related issues. So unbundling, third-party access, tariffs, and mutualization. So in summary, there's two summaries with two takeaways we take from this. In relation to the market-related issues, we would like to see the Commission focusing on creating an internal market for hydrogen, ensuring that competition drives the development of the market. And in relation to the network issues, we would like to see it based on the internal energy market, the principles established there. Because both of these elements have given us the energy markets we have today in gas and electricity, the internal gas market, the internal electricity market. And we would suggest that the focus of the Commission would be to bring an internal hydrogen market. And then to make sure that these three work together to have energy system integration between these three markets. So let's talk about first the market-related issues. And I said straight away, this is technology neutrality. So why is this? And we'd just like to talk a little bit about the underlying uncertainties in relation to the development of the hydrogen market, which are many. So there's two major uncertainties. Well, there's many, okay, but there's two major uncertainties. One is how much hydrogen are we going to need, low and zero carbon hydrogen? When are we going to need it? And what sort will be the most competitive at what period in the decarbonisation cycle? So in terms of how much demand will there be? Well, we know there'll be about 8 million tonnes in order to replace the feedstock hydrogen that is used for methanol, steel, fertilizers above all. But in terms of its demand as an energy vector, that is more tough to predict. Will it be used in road transport? Well, probably in heavy goods vehicles, but on the other hand, some companies are betting on electric even for heavy goods vehicles. For high heat energy intensive industry, probably, but we've got 20 to 30 years of innovation before 2050 hits. And obviously direct electrification is far more efficient than the use of hydrogen. And so it's really, really difficult to understand that. The second thing is in terms of costs. I mean, we've all seen, well, I'm sure you haven't all seen this, comes from a study that Andres, myself, Professor Glachon did last year, where we tried to take all the studies that we could find to try and find some common ground as to what we expect the future price of hydrogen to be in 2030. And you can see here huge ranges in the prediction. For example, in 2030, green goes from 0.9 to 2.1, blue 1 to 1.95. And so here's the important thing. It's very difficult to know which of these thresholds is going to be the most likely. But in relation to electricity for hydrogen in the short term, this is a tough one, because the lower figure here is predicated on using cheap PV in the south, basically, very cheap renewables. And it's very difficult to see where those cheap renewables are going to come from. Because if you are able to produce PV in Portugal at 10 euros a megawatt hour, why would you use it to produce very cheap hydrogen instead of sending it into the pool, selling it into the pool at 30 euros a megawatt hour? And so it looks very difficult to see how in the short term, okay, not in the medium long term, but until 2030, 2035, unless you're going to import your hydrogen, which is going to be really difficult by then, you're going to get to that number. And so you then have quite a large difference between the price of green hydrogen and the expected price of blue hydrogen in 2030. 2050, it's a different story, but we're talking about 2030 at the moment. The other issue is, will we have enough electricity, renewable electricity, to actually produce green hydrogen by 2030? This comes from a study that has been done by Professor Bellmans, working with the EUI, trying to predict future demand and supply of renewable electricity. And what Professor Bellmans has done, this will be available in a week or so. So this is hot off the press, okay? is, so Professor Bellmans has taken the most optimistic scenarios that he can find in relation to the availability of renewable electricity. So these are based on a 55% renewable electricity share by 2030. So there is room here potentially for upscaling, okay? And then taking most optimistic forecasts that available, taking the maximum capacity of offshore wind that's identified, and assuming that it will be developed. And then taken a relatively pessimistic approach on how much renewable electricity will be required. So for example, accepting that all the energy efficiency, most ambitious targets are met. So in other words, you have an optimist, not optimistic, a high level in terms of how much renewable electricity we have, which can be further increased, and a conservative approach on how much will be needed. And excluding industry and excluding hydrogen, you see in 2030, it's going to be extremely challenging to have enough renewable electricity to meet the demands for electrification and for transport. On top of this, so we have here a demand of 1,500, okay? 10 million tons of hydrogen from electrolyzers, I understand, okay, adds another 500 terawatt hours to this figure. In order to decarbonize industry, you've got to add another 500 to 1,000 terawatt hours to this line here. So the conclusion is by 2030, without the import of hydrogen or the import of electricity, this is going to be really tough. So that's the reason why we take the conclusion that a technology neutral approach is the right one. Not saying that one source of hydrogen is better than the other, but as Yorgo says quite correctly, carbon is the new currency, the new energy currency. And so that feeds into the way in which we would approach the market related issues. This is not to say that we are not a fan of green hydrogen, on the contrary, but it's a matter of ensuring that green hydrogen is introduced in the market in competition with other forms of hydrogen at the correct speed. Okay, so what does this mean in concrete terms? I'm sorry, just one quick illustration of not getting the market-based approach right, okay? If you pursue hydrogen form A above hydrogen form B for political reasons, and hydrogen form A is €1 a ton more expensive than the competitive alternative, and you've excluded the competitive alternative for political reasons, okay? And you're €1 a ton more expensive. Now that is the sort of figure that we're looking at in the previous graph. The Commission's objective is to ensure that we have 10 million tons of hydrogen by 2030. That makes an awful lot of sense because we have 8 million tons of grey hydrogen, which is extremely polluting. It needs to be replaced, that's sure. 8 million tons is 8 billion kilos. €1 a kilo too expensive, you've blown 8 billion a year in unnecessary subsidies, which could have been used for something better, such as energy efficiency in particular. So this is really important to get it right and get to the timing right. So there's where we come to actually how you do it in regulatory terms. So in terms of definitions, we would propose the following definitions: that renewable hydrogen is hydrogen produced via a reaction powered by energy from renewable sources. Okay, so that's any form of hydrogen powered by renewable electricity in particular. Low carbon hydrogen would be hydrogen where the life cycle emissions are compatible with the threshold to be set in the directive. That's the second one, low carbon hydrogen. Because obviously you can't call grey hydrogen minus one ton of greenhouse gas as low carbon. It has to be a definition in order to ensure that it's supported correctly. Zero carbon hydrogen is hydrogen produced in a way that it's certified as life cycle basis zero carbon, no net GHG. Negative carbon hydrogen, obviously, well, that also speaks to itself. It has to be one in which the carbon is actually removed from the overall system through the production of the hydrogen. Now, coming back to low carbon hydrogen, hydrogen where the life cycle emissions are compatible with the threshold to be set in the directive. And here's the question, what should that be? And here's an area that Andries and I are struggling, to be perfectly frank. Because the obvious answer is taxonomy. That would be the obvious answer, because we have the taxonomy thresholds and we have a political decision on what is sustainable for the purposes of sustainable finance. So it's very seductive. However, Andries and I have been having a conversation. Is it the right one? And this is something that we're unsure about. So taxonomy is intended to set the thresholds for sustainable finance. So for financial instruments, green bonds, financial products that are sold as sustainable, and to determine what they should be. What are those sustainable products? And also to ensure that companies report on what percentage of their activities are considered to be sustainable for that purpose. So it's very much a forward-looking, it's very much a shall we say, highly ambitious approach in terms of defining of what is green, which is quite right. Because if you're having a product which is selling itself as a green bond, it should be focusing on next generation investments. However, the taxonomy threshold as it is set, I understand, and there's more work that needs to be done in terms of determining the technical measurement criteria before you can actually answer this question 100%. But what it seems to be is green hydrogen, unless it's made with very old Chinese PV panels, is in, obviously. Blue hydrogen, so ATR with brand new CCS at critical technology, is in. But if you take an existing steam methane reformer that produces hydrogen today and put a CCS plant on it, it won't be compatible. So you will not be able to use investments in CCS to bring existing steam methane reforming, existing grey hydrogen plants in the taxonomy. And that's fine. Okay, that's where it is. But is that the right definition in relation to the future directive? And here's the question, because once you've set the definition here, as we'll see in a minute, that then rolls into support schemes and guarantees of origin, logically. That's the reason. So if you use taxonomy here, your support schemes and your guarantees of origin will probably, unless you take a different approach, that doesn't make sense, not apply to the ability of existing hydrogen producers to use carbon capture and storage in order to decarbonize their existing hydrogen production facilities. And therefore, they are unlikely to receive guarantees of origin, unlikely to receive public support. And we're wondering whether that makes sense. Because what it will mean is they will then have the commercial incentive to continue to run these things because they probably, assumably, are not amortized. And so the question arises, by not allowing this to happen, because they take what, 70% odd of the carbon out of the system, you would in fact be reducing the speed in which greenhouse gases are taken out of the system rather than encouraging it, because you would simply create an economic incentive for these producers to continue to operate them rather than decarbonize them. And you're depriving the internal hydrogen market of a very cheap, quick start carbon removal system. So that's a question we'd like to throw out, because we're not entirely sure what the right answer is there. So guarantees of origin. So this is largely mirrored from the Renewable Energy Directive, the second one. So guarantees of origin obviously should be issued to all renewable low, zero, and negative carbon hydrogen produced in the territory or imported. So obviously you have to have very careful verification measures like you do in relation to biofuels, imported biofuels certification, to ensure that when you are buying imported renewable low, zero, negative carbon, it actually is what it says on the tin. Secondly, we would suggest that guarantees of origin, or it seems to be logical, would only be issued to hydrogen that meets the hydrogens defined above. And there lies the issue with low carbon hydrogen and taxonomy. Or you could take a different approach, of course, and say they can be given to any form of hydrogen, even if they don't meet the definition. Doesn't even make sense. The other issue we would propose is that you would put in law now that by 2050, guarantees may only be issued to zero carbon and negative carbon hydrogen. This then solves the issue of potential concern of grandfathering hydrogen production that is not zero carbon. Because anybody who invests in, for example, a blue hydrogen plant that can't be zero carbon in 2040 should be aware that they are taking the risk that it will not be amortized and they will lose money. Okay. The other issues here, they designate competent bodies to supervise support schemes, take account of the GOOs. The other issue in relation to guarantees of origin, which is also very important, is that the guarantees of origin are based on a life cycle greenhouse gas level and also other environmental externalities. This also has a reference in relation to the taxonomy, of course, that the do no significant harm issues in the taxonomy are obviously relevant in terms of guarantees of origin here, that the guarantees of origin should indicate any significant harm within that definition. The others are standard in relation to the RED 2 and assumably the RED 3. Now, here's another difficult issue that Andres and I also struggle with, and that's the issue of additionality. So I'm producing renewable hydrogen. And I'm buying my renewable electricity to produce my renewable hydrogen on the basis of a corporate power agreement from an existing renewable producer. So I have my green label, if you like many of us do at home. We buy our electricity from an electricity producer. But okay, let's assume that in order to produce these 10 million tons of hydrogen by electrolysis, 500 terawatt hours per year is taken off the electricity production, renewable electricity production, with guarantees of origin. The only effect, or the risk that the effect of that does, is to bump up the electricity demand, which creates another 500 terawatt hours of gas or coal production. So indirectly, what you do is you buy renewable hydrogen, but you cause incremental gas and coal generation. Now, if that happens, it makes no sense. Because if you're taking gas electricity, turning it into hydrogen, compared to using gas to simply produce the hydrogen, you've lost 40% of the power of the value of the hydrogen. So if you're going to do it like that, you're much better off doing nothing and simply producing the hydrogen from natural gas with steam methane reforming. Okay, so if you don't find a problem to solve this additionality, you're better off doing nothing. But this is a tough one. So how do you make sure that the renewable electricity that you are using for your hydrogen doesn't simply cause additional production of gas or coal electricity indirectly? And we suggest three ways. Perhaps there are more. One is obviously you simply plug in your electrolysis plant to a brand new offshore wind power plant. Great idea. Doesn't work, unfortunately. Well, it might work very occasionally. Probably a second one, which probably looks more persuasive, through a specific power purchase agreement with a renewable electricity, so an offshore wind power plant, for example, which is constructed specifically but not necessarily exclusively to supply the electrolysis, and where the guarantees of origin are surrendered and the electricity does not count to a member state's renewable energy target. So therefore, it's truly incremental. The last one would be that the renewable electricity would be used or sourced during a period when there is too much renewable electricity on the grid and it would otherwise be curtailed or stored. Finally, national support schemes. First of all, should there be hydrogen targets? We suggest it's going to be tough to do a European binding hydrogen target any more than the 8 million tons or 10 million tons. Whether we're in the political place for a binding hydrogen target remains to be seen. But we would suggest there's no reason why member states should not be required to set their own low and zero carbon hydrogen targets in the context of the governance regulation, so non-binding targets to give transparency. In terms of support schemes, we believe that they should provide incentives without distorting the market and be limited to hydrogen compatible with the thresholds in the definition. Here we're back to the taxonomy question. They should be designed to ensure that hydrogen producers are responding to market signals, so tenders. We would argue, this is a difficult one, that the support should be in an open, transparent, competitive, non-discriminatory and be granted in a manner designed to ensure cost effectiveness in terms of maximizing GHG reduction. So in other words, we believe that the tenders for capacity should be technology neutral. Now, the next one is important. So first of all, the basic for capacity tenders, so contracts for difference, should be simply on the basis of greenhouse gases saved per euro subsidy. However, member states should clearly have the option to finance specific technology demonstration plans. There's a difference between R&D and demonstration and capacity. R&D and demonstration, it makes obvious sense to discriminate, I don't like that word, to differentiate in terms of technology specific, because you want to increase the speed of technology development in certain areas. In terms of capacity, it's different. You want to create capacity for hydrogen at the lowest cost. The other issues are, I think, well known and doesn't require further thing. And now I will pass to Andries to talk about the network rules.
Yeah. Thank you, Christopher. And for networks, even if the legislation is anticipated later, and even if I will spend less time on it compared to what Christopher made on market issues, it's not less important, because market without clear understanding how networks are functioning is not sufficient really to provide perspectives. And there is another aspect that is quite crucial, and hydrogen network regulation comes into it. It's a system integration, because we bring another vector. We should not split it another vector in a completely different environment. So I think that is quite important to understand that there is opportunity to bring energy system integration with this legislation, where we are fully confident that the main principles that are in internal energy market are serving us very well. So unbundling, third-party access, not discrimination, transparency, monitoring and oversight by national regulatory authorities, also consumer protection. So these are the issues that very clearly should be in this regulation. Then there is the issue of exemption, and the market is evolving. The current regulation is already provide for exemptions, but if it's not detrimental to competition, then it definitely could be enlarged, because that doesn't create particular new challenge, but it should be under clear oversight of the regulators. That means that hydrogen market should be very dynamic in regulatory approach. So it should be very much subject to regulatory interventions according to market monitoring, but based on EU-wide indicators as indicated by also regulators. Then there is issue is who can own and operate hydrogen networks. And there is definitely a need for certification. And here is already opportunity for integration. So energy system integration, it should be seen from this point of view, and that would provide additional also opportunities looking on electricity, gas, and hydrogen. So it shouldn't be seen as a separately. Specifically stands out the issue of repurposing gas assets for hydrogen transport. It is a challenge, but it's need to be considered because the costs we need to take into account. So that means that first of all, there should be coherent approach between hydrogen, gas, and electricity sector. So national network development plans is definitely key instruments, but some could be additional added. Then there is the issue of repurposing, and it should be done on the cost-benefit analysis that is approved by Europe-wide methodology. And then there is the issue of unbundling between gas network and hydrogen network. So we support very clearly the view of non-cross subsidization. I know that there are some issues. Sometimes there is discussion of mutualization of hydrogen network costs with gas network costs, but I don't believe, and we don't believe that it is the way forward. Last issue that I would also leave for discussion is one is related to a network for issues related to the tariffs, different zones. So should we follow Quo Vadis study or not? I think that is an open question at this stage that need to be looked upon. And also power to gas, where we definitely agree that it is market-based activity, but are there need for exemptions? I think this is also open questions that it is there. With this, I would end, and now I would love to move to discussant. I will follow. I will follow by alphabetic order. So, Jorgo, you have this advantage with being the first. Jorgo, please.
Thanks very much indeed, Andris. And if you allow, I would share also the screen for a presentation, not a big presentation, but answering all of your questions. We presented as an answer to all this the Hydrogen Act at a high-level conference of the European presidency. And well, basically everybody has this here in mind, the hydrogen renewables and the case of reaping renewable energy resources for hydrogen and creating synergies. And I'm very glad that Christopher made his point very clearly. In the end, it's about the definition. I'll come to that. But this here is indeed the vision, offshore platforms that exist or will be built now with offshore electrolyzers directly connected to the grid, repurposed offshore pipelines transporting the hydrogen, and then this is the hub to supply hydrogen also to ships in the transit. So this is the vision, and you have heard about that. Now, what is the reality? The reality is that the European Commission has set this target of 6 gigawatt until 24. And you can see here, I hope you can see my cursor, this violet line here, that's the 6 gigawatt target. And as you can see here, if we put together the concept of projects, the feasibility studies, the projects that are already in preparatory stage and in construction, the 24 target risks not to be reached, as we have at the moment still some reluctancy of investors to say, yes, we go. The good news is that last Friday, when the timeline, when the deadline closed for projects at the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, we got some 1,053 projects. So the number might be higher, but all the projects we really know don't indicate at the moment that the barriers that we still see can be overcome. And one barrier is, of course, the risks from RED II interpretation. And the solutions would be to revise, first of all, the renewable energy targets upwards in line with the 2030 target plan to facilitate faster decarbonization and the much needed growth of renewable energy. One major driver here could be the Constitutional Court ruling in Germany that made the government within 1 week to put the target from -55 to -65, which is quite important for an industrialized country like Germany. The second thing is to look at the principle of additionality, which is so important, and nobody doubts that you need additional renewable capacities. However, as we have seen also in the chat already, there was a very, very good remark saying that as it is currently, no, it doesn't work. So what we propose is that you have a temporal and geographical correlation in 2025 and conduct a thorough market assessment against market uptake and the 24 and 2030 targets outlined in the hydrogen strategy. So phase in as of 25 and use the next years as a kickstart phase, and then to accept guarantees of origin alongside PPAs or later on hydrogen purchase agreements to prove the renewable clean character of the electricity used. Now, this most important issue that also Christopher raised here is the definition. And we think that we should overcome the color code. We should talk about clean hydrogen, not because we are favoring blue against green, but because there are also some discrepancies when we look thoroughly at some renewable production modes. And the solar from China, for instance, produced with coal-based electricity mainly, has had some negative LCA accounts, and we don't see that at the moment. That is why it's very important to have clear thresholds that need to be defined. What is low carbon, what is clean, low carbon hydrogen, what is clean hydrogen, also to be in line with the EU strategy. And only renewable hydrogen should receive a premium support, that we absolutely agree. Any option that offers a GHG abatement of 90% and above should be considered as clean and contributing towards meeting the objectives of the climate law. What we saw in the taxonomy is 74%. So there's a clear, this is easier to achieve. It's not easy for all blue. It's easy for advanced blue applications. We have laid down in our Hydrogen Act the 90%. And we are absolutely sure that low carbon, of course, will be needed in the transition to renewable hydrogen, that without any doubt. And of course, this threshold, could also be used as the basis for any financial support. Why did we then come to this idea to combine all this, both aspects that Christopher and Andris explained here? Why is there a need for a Hydrogen Act? Because, well, hydrogen has come from an afterthought to a central pillar of the energy system. And that is why we need to put in place a fit-for-purpose legislative regime to govern hydrogen and hydrogen networks, to remove the barriers to hydrogen investment. And the barrier I just mentioned, and you can see in the chat why this is a barrier. You need to prove so many things. No investor is doing that then. And I really warn that we just continue like that. So we need to create a level playing field with other net zero technologies, which is not given. If you look at RED II, there are factors of 4 in favor of some electrical solutions. And why is that? We also need to promote a harmonized approach to hydrogen via the development of this Hydrogen Act, because the EU has a unique opportunity at the moment to develop an economy in Europe, as well as a blueprint for global hydrogen production. How does it look like? Now, what we propose is to put everything in 3 phases and in two spheres. The 2 spheres are the blue sphere, the infrastructure. The green sphere is the market uptake, the hydrogen market relevant aspects. The 3 timelines are from now to 25. That's the kickstart phase, and then the ramp up phase from 25 to 35. And then as of 35, we see a clear phase of market growth. Within the kickstart phase, it's very important to have a fast tracking, to see some initial projects in order to achieve that 1 million ton or the 6 gigawatt target by 2024. So we need to relax state aid. I think we have a common understanding here that it's important, and I pick up what Christopher said in a previous meeting, well, to get the price down from champagne to Prosecco and later on also to table water. But this you can only achieve by producing volume. Then during the ramp up phase, we will see a lot of blending, but only as a transition technology. We don't believe that blending will last longer than 35. We will see the building up of hydrogen valleys when it comes to infrastructure, hubs that need to be connected, and the connection will be done by a backbone, by pipelines that will connect first the hubs and later on serve as a pan-European hydrogen backbone and as an infrastructure. When it comes to the market ramp up, there needs to be a stimulation for production. We believe auctions are a very good tool to do so, and stimulation of demand. We believe carbon contracts for difference is a very good tool to do so, and we could even see this in one mechanism, one European mechanism to be done. I will explain in a minute. And of course, the guarantees of origins for acceptance and hydrogen production tariffs are an important part. I also will allude to that. And then later on, you have in the infrastructure as of 35, the converting of large parts of the natural gas infrastructure into hydrogen infrastructure, but also a CO2 infrastructure, possibly an ammonia infrastructure, possibly a water infrastructure. So the natural gas infrastructure will be plentiful and multi-talented. And with regards to the market, we will see a transition to a regular market for energy commodities. The market up. Well, what happens in the market in the kickstart phase? We believe that for the funding in this first phase, large-scale projects play a fundamental role. We will come up with some big flagship projects during the next 4 to 6 weeks to present them. These will be projects, no regret, they will be done, and they kickstart. There will be dedicated state aid guidelines for hydrogen. There will be IPCEI projects. Not all of them are IPCEI, important project of common European interest, but some are. The use of EU funds will play, of course, a role. They are mentioned here. And the European Clean Hydrogen Alliance is a tool. It's not the only tool, it's an important tool. When it comes to the scope and the process, CAPEX is well known as being as an issue to be funded, but OPEX as well. And this can be flexibly done by the carbon contract for difference paid at the consumer side. We need an up to 100% funding. I make this very clear, not forever, but in this first phase until 25. And we are happy to see that the Commission is really flexible to look into this. And the notification thresholds for hydrogen technologies should be increased to 200 million euro. We need faster and simpler notification procedures, and DG Competition is fully aware. Now, the market roadmap after that, 35 to 50, what we need, of course, is a combination of a price setting mechanism and auctions. So what we could see that auctions could replace the combination of set production tariffs and auctions. Let's see, I give a very clear example. Let's take a ArcelorMittal steel plant in Ghent, very close to Antwerp, and they need from 25 to 35 megatons of hydrogen for their steel production. The mechanism that will be built up would auction that 5 million megatons globally. And if then a plant in Morocco says we can do it, a hydrogen purchase agreement between the partners will be done. So this is to bring down costs at the production side. When it then comes to the demand side, still ArcelorMittal would say, hey, this is much more expensive than using coke coal. And this can be covered through the carbon contract for difference. So you have both elements, an element at the supply side and an element at the demand side that could be put into one mechanism. And this is what we would foresee. And of course, the GOs play a very important role, but I'll come back to them in 1 minute. Now, the regulation of the networks, that's my answer to Andris. There needs to be, of course, design of a distinct legal framework at EU level. You cannot just take hydrogen and use the gas regulation. That's not possible. The development of hydrogen markets will not be identical to that of natural gas markets. There will be a gradual and flexible approach needed in line with market and infrastructure development. Inserting hydrogen into existing gas laws does not provide sufficient flexibility. Hydrogen markets framework should, as basic principles, respect the same principles for unbundling, third-party access, transparency, non-discrimination, cost reflectivity for tariff setting, monitoring, and the oversight by the NAR and by ACER. We are fully in favor. Andris, I fully agree to the points that you made. Hydrogen and natural gas are not interchangeable in all applications. For example, as a transport fuel, it's not so easy to just change. And also as a feedstock in energy-intensive industries. Sometimes you need a clear blending, a clear mix, so it's not so easy to just follow gas rules. Also, we should continue the logic conveyed in the revised 10E proposal to have a separate hydrogen category in Annex 2 to ensure the consistency and coherence between legislation, clear separation between hydrogen infrastructure and natural gas infrastructure. And finally, you mentioned that already, I think also Christopher alluded to the grandfathering clause that should be taken into consideration with regards to existing hydrogen networks. They are, compared to what we are building up, small, but of course there is an interest of the partners involved to own them privately for some time. Last slide, the GOs. They need to be, they are an essential tool for the market of clean hydrogen. So they need to consider that hydrogen is a distinct energy carrier separate from electricity and gas. We mentioned that already. So for blending, okay, introduce mixed things, but for dedicated infrastructure, no. GOs must include the primary energy source and the GHG footprint. Again, a solar panel in China should also depict the footprint. I say this because when we go for funding schemes, just to buy everything in China does not make sense. We need to rebuild up also our solar manufacturing capacity in Europe. And that is why this plays a high role. In wind, this is given. Wind turbines are mainly produced, because they are huge offshore turbines, huge. They are mainly produced in Europe, and it makes sense to have here a clear combination. You are well aware of our 5 Ts, so the GOs need to be trackable, traceable, tradable, transparent, and trustworthy. The GOs need to capture the attributes resulting from the different production pathways, and an international GO system is required for import and export of hydrogen. We had last week a meeting with Kadri Simpson and the American Energy Secretary, who alluded to that point himself. He likes to work together with the Europeans. So all in all, I think thanks very much for this approach. And that was basically my answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Jorgo. Thank you for very broad answer to the issues, and thank you for sharing views. Now I would move to Ilaria Conti. Ilaria, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andris and Christopher, for the invitation, and also for the excellent presentation by which you opened this debate. I will be very quick also in the interest of time, because I would like to just touch upon one specific point on what you call the market-related issues, and one specific point or general views, and one specific point on the network-related issues. In general, I fully agree that the topics that you highlighted are really the ones which deserve quite some reflection in this stage. We are just a little bit before the release of two important packages and many legislative measures, as you just mentioned, one in July and one later on in the second half of this year. So it's important to give relevance to these topics and try to possibly come to agreements, coming to some at least general framework which can be understood, also in the interest of European citizens, that should not be neglected in this discussion, which might seem at sometimes too high level, but considering the importance and the relevance that sustainability, hydrogen, future energy system integration have at this moment, I think it's important to keep in mind and to remind. Regarding definitions, I fully agree with what several speakers already mentioned before me. The whole issue of taxonomy is very important, because definitions are directly linked to the commercial value, so to the determination then of potentially subsidies and preferential access and other types of facilitation. So it's important that when we are to define which gases can be considered renewable, low carbon, zero carbon, or not, let's say, sustainable, then we have to have clear the parameters. And as you know, this was the object of some study also in the Florence School of Regulation 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, regarding the terminology, the right terminology to be used, which according to the study has to be based on clear parameters, these parameters being the green value of a gas and also its accessibility, so the facility for this gas to enter the system. Now, things have slightly evolved in the last months, and I actually think that your definition, your outline of gases with the definitions into these 4 categories is very good. Clearly, the greenhouse gases, the life cycle assessment of greenhouse gases is becoming a very important parameter. On the other hand, I also think that it has to be applied to all categories. So if we decide that greenhouse gases life cycle assessment is an important parameter, then it should apply to all categories that we want to identify. Otherwise, the risk is, of course, to result with some confusion on the feedstock that is used to produce some gases and the energy through which the process is powered. So I think this is quite important. There are, for example, some processes like pyrolysis, which generate hydrogen starting from different types of feedstock. So you can produce hydrogen through pyrolysis starting from biomass or also from hydrocarbons. So again, the big dilemma is indeed where does the life cycle assessment start? And shall we take into account the feedstock also, or just the power through which this process is fueled? Of course, this is an open question, but a very important one which should find an answer soon. It's a big dilemma also because at this point, if we become too strict with definitions, then we might end up having renewable hydrogen, what you also call renewable hydrogen in your classification, being really like a sort of white fly, something which is very rare and very difficult to produce and also very costly. That's big dilemma we are all facing at the moment, particularly because On one hand, we have to consider the costs. Certainly, this is something which can't be neglected. On the other hand, we also have to consider the current status of the grid in Europe, which has a pretty high carbon intensity. So according to a recent study, if we had to produce hydrogen from the grid right now, only 3 countries, renewable hydrogen from the grid, only 3 countries would have a sufficiently low carbon intensity to produce this type of hydrogen. Others, as of course, targets to get there by 2030, but they have not them. They are on the way to reach them. And I'm talking, of course, about the standards identified by the recent EU taxonomy delegated act of 3 tons of CO2 per ton of hydrogen produced. Then, of course, as also Jorgo said, if we are talking about different standards, then this classification vary, of course. And there's nothing better than standardization, except the fact that everybody likes his own standards. So that's what probably how the discussion will probably evolving very soon in the next weeks. Okay, so this was about the market-related issues. Regarding network-related issues, as you know, I'm fully in line with you, Andris, on the points you outlined in your last slides. I also strongly believe that the current setup, the regulation, the gas directive and regulation, including the third energy package, on which basically the last 10 years of history of European energy regulation were based, proved successful. So there is really, I think we should care about keeping at least the main pillars, and those are the ones you identified and you described: third-party access, non-discrimination, ensuring a level playing field. On the other hand, we are in front of a very different scenario from the scenario we would have seen when the third energy package was released. And therefore, there needs to be some flexibility in regulatory terms as to allow the market uptake of some specific types of gases. And this is something I think we share with the in Florence School, mostly the vision included in the white papers by SEER and ACER, which envisage a gradual approach to regulation. So we can call it in many ways, and in different debates I heard regulatory sandboxes, regulatory toolkits, etc. But the concept is always the same. What we have at the moment might not be fully appropriate to in terms of instruments, of regulatory instruments. So there might be some exemptions, and as you correctly said, Andris, there are already some exceptions allowed in the current directive and regulation. So building on that and really envisaging some space and time for flexibility. Last point regarding tariffs. I followed with great interest the debate on this point at the Madrid Forum 10 days ago. And as we know, and as you also outlined, there seems to be, well, it seems that the debate on the Quo Vadis study and idea has been somehow restarted. I'm sure that Benedict will probably touch upon this. We in Florence School, we had at the time of the Quo Vadis study, so actually 3 years ago, even though sounds like much longer, but it was only 3 years ago, we also published some ideas on how the entry-exit system could be eventually reformed or improved. While the entry-exit system as well has proved very effective to overcome many of the difficulties of the barriers and to facilitate actually the development of wholesale gas trading across borders. The issue of pancaking is something that we had already identified, which has been discussed also as one of the issues inherent to this to the entry-exit system. So with a view to improve this aspect specifically, we think that a discussion on this could be timely and probably appropriate, because with the reducing volumes of gas in the future, this would probably mitigate the difficulties in coming to an agreement on removing the interconnection, the charging of tariffs at internal interconnection points. And therefore, it might be easier to come to an agreement also when it comes to the identification of an intercompensation mechanism between TSOs. So we don't know if this will be easy to achieve, probably not. But what we can say is that if this discussion needs to take place, this is probably the right moment. Also, in view of the fact that for hydrogen, the tariff system might be slightly different, might be conceived as slightly different, as potentially hydrogen will not, at least in the first phase, will not cover long distances as natural gas used to cover until now. I guess that's the end of my points. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Very clear. I would like now to move to our next speaker, and I'm very, very happy that Jakob Hansen has agreed to participate in our webinar. I think we need to include in our debate by far more the industry's representative, because we speak about supply, but less about actually demand. Jakob, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Andres. And as you say, I represent not only a huge consumer of hydrogen, but also a huge producer of hydrogen, because at the moment, the fertilizer industry produces about 50% of all hydrogen. It doesn't go to the market because we use it directly to produce ammonia, which is a building block for all fertilizers. And at the moment, we use gas as our source of hydrogen, but we could, of course, also use renewable energy and electrolyzers. So this is the interesting and exciting perspective for us. As I say, we are very used to using gas, so we are very familiar with the third gas directive, and I think in many ways it's worked very well for us. So it's obvious that when you think about the principles here about unbundling, non-discrimination, third-party access, transparency, and so forth, it's very logical also to base a regulation of hydrogen on these pillars from gas, because they have served us well. But we are then trying to regulate something in advance of it actually happening, and it is difficult. And I would like to point to some issues I think we need to build into this future regulation in order not to create a straitjacket basing ourselves on the third gas directive that we then need to get out of later. And for me, two of the key issues is it's going to be a gradual process. That's number one. And number two, in any hydrogen regulation, you need to find the room for ammonia. So these are my two main points. And let me start and explain a little bit why I come to this. I think first we need to point out that green hydrogen is very energy intensive. It takes 50% more energy to produce hydrogen from electrolysis as it does from natural gas in an SMR process. So, for the next long time, we clearly have not enough renewable energy. One ammonia plant need 1 gigawatt electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen. So, keep it going, keep the renewable energy going, because we need a lot of it to supply our industry here. And that's also why I think whenever we have hydrogen or produce hydrogen or green hydrogen, it should be used first for the hard to abate sectors, industries, first of all. And I think you will see very soon that you will have renewable energy coming directly to plants where then it's put through electrolyzers to produce the hydrogen you need at the site. It's happening, it's already being planned and it's being constructed. So, and I think we're going to have a lot of local sites with hydrogen, and I wonder whether and how they need to be regulated. In the second step, we will see several industrial plants going together in a sort of hydrogen network. And Jorgo mentioned the steel plant in Ghent, but there's already a plan now to connect that with the fertilizer plant in Geleen and the refineries around Antwerp, and to make a sort of hydrogen network for these plants. And again, I wonder whether that should be part of a general regulation or stay outside. I'm not quite sure. And this comes back to me that we are entering into a gradual process. And I wonder whether we do not need to get some experience before we lock everything just on the basis of the third energy directive. So we can go on, but really I think the priority must be to supply the green hydrogen to industry first of all, and then build from there. And I personally don't know whether I think green hydrogen should ever go out to households, but that's maybe a personal opinion that I don't need to discuss here. I liked what Andres was saying earlier about the need for system integration, because I do think we need a lot more integration and a lot more flexible system. Let me give you a concrete example. End of this year, we're going to start to produce green ammonia, green fertilizers based on solar power and a 20 megawatt electrolyzer in Spain. Now this electrolyzer is only going to run in the daytime, because in the night the solar panels obviously doesn't work, and they cannot get the supply of green energy from the grid because it's too expensive, which means you have expensive equipment standing there being only used, well, less than half the time. And this is why I think we need to have much more integration if you really want to go down this green hydrogen line and think about this. Second point, ammonia, the role of ammonia. So I think green ammonia is going to be the workhorse of the hydrogen economy. So that's why we need to take it into account when we do the regulation for hydrogen. So ammonia is not only going to be used for fertilizers, but it's also probably going to be used for shipping, carbon-free shipping fuel, and it's an energy carrier as well. Jorgo was talking about bringing in hydrogen from Morocco, and I think a lot of that hydrogen is going to be brought in via ammonia. So, and I don't think Europe will be self-sufficient with renewable energy anytime soon. We will still have to import a lot of energy in form of renewable energy from places around the globe where they have probably more wind and more sun, and this will probably going to be in the form of ammonia, because ammonia is a well-known product. It's shipped around the globe already, 20 million tons. 200 million tons is produced already around the world. So there's a lot of experience to build on. So when we talk about importing hydrogen, maybe we should think about it's going to be via ammonia and make sure that the regulation can work with that. I cannot highlight enough what Jorgo said about certification, guarantees of origin, because we really need to work with that, and it also need to work for green ammonia, because we are creating a new product. We need to create demand, and we also need to create supply, and so we need really to have these guarantees of origin and certification in order. And my last point is that Rome was not built in one day, and we will not go green overnight. So for a long time, we will have green hydrogen, gray hydrogen side by side. We will have green ammonia, we will have gray ammonia side by side. And I think it has many advantages, because it means that we can build up an infrastructure gradually, so that we can gradually it will become more and more green. And Chris Jones was talking about the existing SMR installations and how they can have access to carbon capture and storage technology to become green. And I think we have to go this way, because not everywhere in Europe has a lot of sun and a lot of wind. So we need to be a bit flexible in how we can attack this and take it gradually. And this is also, as I said, something that the new regulations should take into account. So Andres, I think I will stop here. Main points is it's going to be gradual, and the new regulation needs to take and makes into account ammonia and make space for the role it's going to place as the workhorse.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Now I would move to Jan Ingversen. Jan is always supporting us in our events with his wisdom. So Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andres. I don't know if I can come up with more wisdom that we have already heard here today. So thanks for the invitations. Thanks to both you, Andres, and Christopher, and Jorgo, Ilare, and Jakob for bringing in the various perspectives, which I think underscores the one of the, I think, the very, very important points of this transition process that we are looking into, that we need all parts of the value chain to cooperate and to calibrate and to work together. And thank you very much also to Jakob for bringing in the industry, the consumption side here. I think that will be really, really important. I think I do actually agree with a lot of the things which has been said today. I do agree in, yeah, we think that we need similar principles for hydrogen as we have today for gas, unbundling, access, fair tariffs, etc. But of course also that we need a flexible approach. The situation for hydrogen is not the same as it was for natural gas back in the 2008 and 2009. So some relaxation of the principles, some exemptions will be needed. Nevertheless, I think we think it's very important that we already from the outset is clear on the direction and clear on the principles that we are going to use. And of course, then it comes to one of the, I think one of the, maybe on the surface, not so important things, but in practice, I think rather important. And there, Jorgo and I have some discussions whether it should be separate regulations or integrated or merged regulations. We are clearly for a merged or an integrated regulation. There are some factual things there that 2/3 of the future hydrogen grid will be repurposed gas grids, and there is therefore a necessity to have a very, very close regulatory handling, economic regulatory handling of it, but also technical and safety regulatory handling of it. It's owned by the TSOs today, and it will be, I guess, also in the future, maybe in different legal settings, but basically the ownership is with the TSOs. The TSOs has the right of way for the systems already. It's not maybe a very legal technical issue, but nevertheless quite important. We have the right of way, we have the permissions to both construct and operate the systems. We have the technical and operational expertise, and we can manage the transition both on security supply, on market, on technical and operational challenges, if we're keeping these systems and regulation closely together. And then maybe the final argument from my side is that we do have, I think we do today all agree on the sector integration, system integration, whatever we call it, will be important, and we need to do this. But we do also see the reality is that we have electricity and gas regulations are separate, are working as regulatory silos, and we need to get rid of that. So let's not create a third silo with a separate hydrogen regulation. That needs, for us, very obvious. And maybe we need to take some more steps on integrating electricity and gas as well. But let's not start with a third silo. I think that would be a pity. And then let me. That was my key message here. That we think that it's important to keep this integration, to build on this system integration, also in the regulatory way pathway that we are following. Then I do also agree with many of the other speakers that we need to represent the climate value of the various gases, including hydrogen, by building on guarantees of origin, a certification system. It should be applicable cross borders. So, and therefore also it will also need to address the taxes and levies that are you could say being applied in the various member states, and to make sure that this can go across the borders. And I fully agree to Jorgo's 5 T's, and that includes, very importantly, of course, also the trustworthiness. So this is not about you could say outwatering the trustworthiness that we are saying. All kinds of hydrogen and also blends will be a part of the steps that we are taking forward. Maybe there is a clear end goal, but we will have to take some steps in between. We need the various, maybe not perfect solutions in a climate context, but we need those solutions as well on a level playing field, technology neutral, to make the volumes and to meet the challenges that we have in ahead of us. This cannot be done with renewable only. We need to take in the various mixtures and maybe compromises as we go forward. Then finally, my last point will be the financing. Of course, there is a need to look into the finance, both on the infrastructure, but also on the hydrogen production and the consumption. We have said that a part of this could be to look into the regulatory models that we are using here. We know and hear from Acer that cost reflectivity is the key principle here, which I think we can, in broad terms, also agree to. However, cost reflectivity is not as simple as it's said, because if you're looking into the existing entry-exit system, there is, of course, some kind of cost mutualization across the users. The simple fact that you're having one tariff and everybody pays the same, but maybe that is reflecting some kind of cost mutualization. And we think that the aspects here needs to be looked into. How do we share the cost of the transition? It's the cost reflectivity is not necessarily the only parameter that we need to work on, and we need additional financial tools also to make the investments actually taking place. Finally, also in this context, we heard that at the Madrid forum, the Quo Vadis issue is coming up again, and the one tariff for no border European system. I can understand some of the rationales. The pancaking is, in our view, a natural consequence of the entry-exit system. And if you do, you would say, European system, then it's just another form of pancaking, and it's a redistribution of the cost. Some will win, some will lose, and it will take a lot of time, and it will create a lot of tensions between the member states. We think it's a problematic way to go. We think we should look into alternatives, and it's not a matter only of an entry-exit system or a Quo Vadis type system. There could also be, and I think that is in particular could be relevant for the upcoming hydrogen backbone infrastructure, to look into identification of transit pipelines and transit systems. So your tarification is running on a you would say broad terms, point to point, but you would say you're paying the transit cost and not for the mesh networks, which is the problem with the entry-exit systems. So a lot of things to discuss. I haven't covered all things relevant here, but I think we both from the system operators and the producers and the consumers and the storages and traders, we need to discuss a lot in the coming period of time, and I'm looking forward to exchange further with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. It was really, really great. I would advise our panelists, please have a look at chat or the questions and answers. There are a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of interesting suggestions. And if you have a comment, please write those question being put to you or to somebody else or on you. Boyko, now the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Andres. I have the benefit of being one of the speakers to come in late because so far there's so many great ideas discussed that the menu is almost full. I will start with stating just a few simple facts before actually getting into the discussion, which will focus mostly on my behalf to the network issues. Well, I keep asking people who participate in such events focusing on hydrogen, ask yourself, have you ever been close to hydrogen? You have seen gasoline, you have seen diesel, you have seen coal, wood, you have been close to those things almost on a daily basis. You have power in your home, you see it everywhere. And so far, the points which I'm trying to make is that hydrogen as a resource is scarce as we know it. It is made resource. This is the second point which I usually try to make in conversations like this. It is man-made. You can't find it outside, so it's not a natural resource. Well, it exists in interstellar clouds, but that's too far. So this means that whatever regulation comes up in the short run, two things have to be considered from the onset. Hydrogen should be promoted where it makes sense most because it is highly valuable resource. And this means that with the pending regulations, just another example out of the world out there, the actual things, how they are run, how we know energy today. The global oil consumption reached about 4.5 billion tons last year. This means an increase of 1 billion tons in 20 years since the beginning of the century. And that is equivalent, just the increase, just the marginal increase of that fossil fuel use on a global scale is equivalent to about 400 million tons of hydrogen. The global production of hydrogen today stands, if you ask different people how much, stands different sources, anywhere between 60 and 80 million tons on a global scale. Scarce resource, valuable resource. We have to be aware of making the regulations such as to promote the most value-added uses from the onset. Where do these uses fall right now? There's also quite a lot of discussion how regulation should be construed. So in a world where often the comparison is made between a chicken and egg problem, which I think is incorrect comparison to the status of hydrogen today. The problem is that with chicken and egg, you know the chicken and you know the egg. And with hydrogen, we don't know quite a lot of things. So we don't know, for example, the scale. When would hydrogen be available in any scale? The timing, the location, the origin, which way hydrogen would be supplied, the guarantees of origins were discussed. The net benefits are a little bit fuzzy. And the substitution effects, which were also discussed, the interfaces that hydrogen has to other types of energy uses. Would it make sense, for example, to promote any use of hydrogen in residential and commercial applications vis-a-vis industrial applications? And what kind of regulation you need if you wish to promote the high value use of hydrogen in those instances? Substitution effects also related to the specific pathways from the source of hydrogen to the end user. This all for regulators, I think, has boiled down to one topic which was widely discussed today, and that is the need of proportionality, the need of gradual approach to regulation, dynamic approach, which means that yes, you need to monitor the development of hydrogen industry, supply of energy. You also have to monitor how exactly it is used, which means that the forthcoming regulations should establish some kind of a window where the projects with their specific features should be monitored on maybe annual basis to see where exactly are we going. Of course, it was confirmed today many times over that the principles of regulation should be confirmed from the onset, but it doesn't mean that all of these principles should be applicable from the onset to all types of hydrogen undertaking. It depends on whether the scale is right, or whether the timing is right, depends on the end use, depends on how you make that hydrogen. Which brings me to the next point. It was also discussed today, the problem of exemptions. Well, exemptions, or let things be until regulation is needed. This means one word that was mentioned probably about 20 times today, at least I tried to count, is thresholds. Regulations should only be activated if needed. And those thresholds, well, could be related to a few things. Like, for example, scale, timing, location, origin, the substitution effects, the net benefits that the case might bring, but also to things which are other ways of use of hydrogen, other ways to bring hydrogen to market. For example, is it even necessary to regulate a market of hydrogen which operates on a discrete basis? That is, hydrogen is transported, for example, by railroad or truck. It can go anywhere. It's not a natural monopoly. So do you even need a regulation in that instance of the pipes? You only need regulation of pipes if the volume that is carried out is over a certain threshold. Again, the thresholds are important. To give you an idea about how big a threshold can be for hydrogen, a 28-inch pipeline of moderate pressure, not very high, would carry on an annual basis about 12 million tons oil equivalent of natural gas. This means about on equivalent basis for hydrogen, that would be somewhere around maybe 6, maybe 4 million tons of hydrogen. Where is all this hydrogen going to come from? Why do you need to regulate the pipeline before the origin is actually clear? The thresholds must be there, the trigger must be there for the regulation to kick in, even though the principles should be known from the onset. So, finally, the repurposing and the cost reflectivity of avoiding cross-subsidization. One thing which also should be considered is, well, we have an excellent infrastructure right now. And the scale of the gas infrastructure in Europe exceeds, in terms of energy carried via that infrastructure, all of the electricity infrastructure by a factor of approximately 2. So this means that there should be some rational way to find the regulation which does not throw out existing infrastructure. Whether that would be via repurposing, whether that would be via some other kind of way. But well, let's remember that there's this saying which says diamonds are forever. I keep repeating that this also applies to pipelines. Pipelines might be forever. Actually, there's quite a lot of examples around Europe, pipelines in existence for more than 60 years. All these things bring me to my main point here, and that is handle with care so that the early stages of development are less seen as risky, as fuzzy by those who want to invest in hydrogen. Do not create a climate of disincentive for investors by overregulation of something which is yet to emerge as a clear example to be regulated. Yes, it is necessary to foresee the clarity of regulatory principles from the onset, but also the gradual approach, the dynamic regulation, coupled with monitoring, including the monitoring of practical projects, not just the infrastructure, and foresee exemptions in all those instances where no natural monopoly is actually likely to exist or is likely. One difficulty, which is often underestimated in this context, and I'll stop there, I'll just point out to that difficulty, invite further comments, that is the regulation of systems that cooperate, and that is electricity and gas, in this instance, primarily hydrogen. To what extent the unbundling third-party access rules should be applicable to producers of hydrogen who are directly connected to renewable energy sources, to what extent unbundling should be applicable to small-scale producers at the level of distribution companies, and so on, etc. The management of the interfaces of different types of energy with hydrogen is particularly difficult since, again, it is a man-made resource. You cannot pick it out of nature on this planet, at least. And that means that, well, all of the above will have to be carefully looked at. Hopefully some practical solutions will be found to the benefit of having accelerated penetration of hydrogen, green hydrogen, in the not so distant future. Thanks.
Thank you, Boyko. Benedict, now is time for conclusions. I know that you have heard a lot, so it's very difficult to make a conclusion on such a broad discussion, and there have been a lot of comments in this. So Benedict, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Andres. Indeed, let me thank the Florence School of Regulation for organizing this webinar. We heard a lot of interesting comments today, and obviously exchanges like these are highly useful for policymakers in the process of developing new rules and regulation. And let me start by saying I assume you're all aware, but please let me point you towards the ongoing public consultation on the hydrogen and gas decarbonization package, which is open now on the Commission's website, and it will run until 18 June. So please submit your views there, and then you won't have to rely on the quality of my note-taking today. I think when talking about hydrogen regulation, it's useful, as some speakers did, to put the use of hydrogen into perspective. Since using hydrogen for the different applications that we heard about today can't be a goal unto itself, but it's rather one of the tools that we have to help us reduce greenhouse gas emissions as an alternative to using fossil fuels and feedstocks. But it's clear that hydrogen can't replace the need for a progressive electrification in sectors where it's possible. And as speakers pointed out as well, producing hydrogen will also mean that we need even more renewable generation. And in the same manner, the upcoming rules on hydrogen will be just one piece in the overall regulatory puzzle, and are part of the ongoing comprehensive review of the energy legislation with the overarching goal of contributing to decarbonization, to the fight against climate change, in accordance with the timeline and the milestones set by the European legislators. And that's it's a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions of 55% by 2030, as you know, and to put us on the pathway towards a fully decarbonized economy by 2050. And all this time we have to make sure that we don't only decarbonize, but that European citizens and businesses continue to have secure access to energy at competitive prices. But in any case, so the rules for hydrogen will be part of the bigger Fit for 55 package, which of course includes the recent proposal and a 10E regulation, the updates of the renewables and energy efficiency targets, and also new rules on addressing methane emissions in the value chain. And of course, the work on hydrogen that we talked about today goes hand in hand with the review of the current natural gas legislation, which is equally important, and where we hope to update the existing framework to enable and promote more use of renewable gases such as biomethane. And I think most of today's discussion showed that designing a regulatory framework for an emerging market like hydrogen is no easy task at all. And in a way, we are asked to square the circle of creating legal certainty for significant investments on the one hand, without hampering natural market growth and market forces and innovation. And I think, of course, stepping back, the first thing we have to ask ourselves, should we have EU rules at all? And in discussion with stakeholders, some say maybe at this stage there's no need for EU level rules. Why not let the market develop freely now and regulate later if the need arises, if market failures materialize? And I think there's some logic to that, but I think today's discussion also highlighted many aspects of hydrogen market where EU level regulation will have added value. And let me just highlight some of those that were mentioned today, which I found particularly striking. Of course, there's firstly the question of legal certainty and the prospect of regulation for investors. And it's still an open question. I think what's better from the point of investors is it regulatory freedom, but together with the potentially fragmented national rules that might develop and the risk of EU level rules coming in at a later stage, or is it the need to deal with some regulation already at an early stage of the developing market and the associated administrative and regulatory burden? It's difficult to quantify that, obviously. Also, then in the context of legal certainty, obviously we talked about taxonomy and kind of underline how important it is. We need to be clear about what we mean when we talk about renewable hydrogen, low carbon, zero carbon hydrogen, and this must be clear across the whole EU to avoid a massive confusion about different systems. Obviously, as Chris mentioned, guarantees of origin will play an important role, and clearly these rules need to be harmonized at EU level to allow for cross-border trading and to make the administrative burden on producers manageable at all. Another issue is hydrogen quality, hydrogen gas quality that we haven't talked about so much today, but I think also here it will be highly important to have some rules in place at an early stage that can allow functioning cross-border trade once we have networks to enable that. Some speakers talk about the question of having the rules in a separate act or not, and that's an interesting question. I must say, from the legislator's point of view, it shouldn't matter too much if we can agree on the rules that we need for creating and enabling an emerging market. It probably doesn't matter too much from a legal and technical perspective where we put them. But I certainly agree with what we heard from NCG and the fact that we have to avoid creating silos, and to the extent that we have silos today, we need to break them up, and we need to have this much stronger integration of the existing energy systems, but also of the hydrogen system. So that's a crucial point. Then in terms of I would say equal access to hydrogen production, there are a number of points where I think EU legislation can help foster investments and the creation of a market, and that's network planning, but also the placement of production facilities, right? Because principally, you can build electrolyzers anywhere you have electricity, but if we want to have a cost-efficient placement of power-to-gas facilities, we'll have to take into account the resulting costs on both the power grid and the gas network side, be it the natural gas system or dedicated networks for hydrogen. And obviously, individual operators, investors wouldn't have this incentive, and if we just have no planning for this, we could have exploding costs on one side, on the other, with a net zero or negative effect on welfare overall. And then, of course, if we boost demand, if we use more hydrogen than we can produce domestically, we'll have to look into imports. And then clearly we need to have a way to have all member states have access to supplies in the same manner that we have it for natural gas today. And obviously there's different ways of transporting hydrogen or the feedstock for it. But we need to make sure that we enable this cross-border trade between member states. Another point is level playing field among operators. And I think here, if we want to avoid distortions of competition, EU-wide rules on unbundling would be important, because if we have vertically integrated producers in one member state, while others insist on unbundling, it's difficult to see how there could be fair competition among these different producers. Same for the transport sector. There's a question if you can realistically have new market entrants into hydrogen transmission services, grid investments, if today's gas TSOs can repurpose existing pipelines at a fraction of the cost of building new pipelines. Some speakers mentioned network tariffs, and I think here I agree with the speakers that said we should avoid undue cross-subsidization. And I believe personally that the targeted and transparent support measures would be preferable to allow financing of new hydrogen grids. For the tariff model, some speakers mentioned the Quo Vadis model, which is obviously not the new development, and it's a model that envisages setting domestic tariffs to zero and collecting all the tariff revenue from the EU external borders. And personally, I think this model would probably be better suited to mature market like gas, which is largely supplied from the outside, as opposed to hydrogen, where we don't have much of a grid yet, and we'll try to have a lot of domestic production in the EU. On the other hand, and that's an important point, is it's true that at this early stage of market development, it might be much more feasible to agree on an inter-TSO compensation mechanism than later on when we have a densely meshed grid in place. Last but not least, the issue of transitional rules. Many speakers mentioned this. How do you introduce regulation in an emerging market without compromising on investor visibility and legal certainty? And that's an interesting question, one we don't have a great answer to yet, so please let us have your comments in the consultation. The gas directive has some instruments to this end, of course. We have the national level derogations for emerging markets, which are mostly expired today. And you always had the project-based exemptions for new infrastructure. But I will add that some stakeholders today are advocating for an even more dynamic system where we introduce rules and regulation only if competitions issue occur in a given market or region. So this is a question that we still need to answer. Yeah, I think these are just some elements of what plays into the overall development of this upcoming hydrogen gas decarbonization package. And as I said earlier, I invite all the parties to make their views known by replying to our public consultation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benedict. Thank you for great conclusions. Well, I am afraid I need to close the event. I just need to, also I would like and love to say again, thank you for all the speakers, panelists, and also for all the participants. It's important debate and it needs to be continued. I would just remind that we have short in time. I think today, German government makes a decision that 2045 Germany will be carbon neutral. And Germany is definitely not the only country with such ambition, but why I mention it, today is 2021, 2045. So the time factor plays an enormous role. So we have not so much options to, I would say, to make mistakes. So we need really to have good debate and quick decisions and then quick implementation. Thank you very much for everybody who joined us, and thank you for speakers. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now.